The air in the Beaumont dining room was always thick with the weight of unspoken things. It was a beautiful room, of course, with its dark mahogany table polished to a mirror shine and the heavy, silver-crested cutlery that felt more like historical artifacts than utensils. That the beauty was suffocating. It was the beauty of a museum meant to be admired from a distance, not lived in. Today, for our weekly Sunday brunch, the air was particularly dense, laced with the cloying scent of Beatrice's prize roses and an undercurrent of polite, simmering resentment. "Alara, dear," my mother-in-law, Beatrice, said, her voice a delicate, tinkling bell that always managed to sound like a judgment. "That's a very simple dress. Is that the fashion now? To be so understated?" She gestured vaguely with a hand laden with heirloom rings, her own floral silk dress of vibrant, complicated tapestry. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. My simple, elegant, and yes, outrageously expensive navy blue sheath was being framed as a sartorial failure, a lack of understanding of the Beaumont way of things. I offered a small, tight smile. "I like clean lines, Beatrice," I said, my voice even. "It's easier. Easier than trying to navigate the labyrinth of your expectations," I thought. Lijo, my husband, shot me a look from across the table, a quick, apologetic glance that I knew so well. His hand rested on mine for a moment, a silent message of solidarity. He loved his family, but he was not blind to their flaws. He was the bridge between my world and theirs, a bridge that felt increasingly strained with every passing Sunday. His sister Charlotte snorted into her mimosa. "Some of us appreciate heritage, Alara," she said, pointedly adjusting the antique locket at her throat. "Things that have been passed down, things with a story." The implication was clear. I had no heritage. I had no story that they considered worth telling. I was a blank page, a parvenu who had somehow wandered into their leather-bound history. I didn't take the bait. Arguing with Charlotte was like wrestling with a shadow. It was exhausting, and you never won. Instead, I turned my attention to Richard, Leo's father. He was a quiet man, perpetually lost in a fog of gentle melancholy, his presence often feeling like a faded photograph. "The garden looks wonderful, Richard," I said. "The hydrangeas are beautiful this year." He looked up, a flicker of genuine warmth in his eyes. "Ah, yes," he murmured. "They've done well. A good year. A blessed year." His eyes held mine for a moment too long, a strange, almost fearful gratitude in their depths. He knew nothing, of course, but he knew that a year ago, the garden, the house, everything had been on the verge of being lost. And then, miraculously, it wasn't. He saw it as a blessing. I knew it as a wire transfer. This house, Beaumont Hall, as Beatrice insisted on calling it, was the center of their universe. It was a sprawling, slightly faded colonial that had been in the family for 4 generations. It was their anchor, their identity, the physical manifestation of their perceived status. And it was the reason I was sitting here enduring this weekly inquisition, because I knew how much it meant to Leo, and because a year ago I had bought it for them, anonymously, secretly. The greatest, most terrible irony of my life was this: the very family who suspected I was with their son for his money was living in a house paid for by mine. And the only person at this table who knew the truth was the man beside me, my husband, who had promised me he would never, ever tell. I met Leo on a rainy Tuesday night at a charity art auction I almost didn't attend. I was in the final grueling stages of negotiating the sale of my company, a scheduling software I'd built from scratch in my tiny apartment, fueled by instant noodles and a terrifying amount of caffeine. My days were a blur of conference calls with lawyers and venture capitalists. My nights were spent staring at code, my brain buzzing with a million lines of logic. My financial advisor, a shrewd, motherly woman named Evelyn, had insisted. I go, "You need to come up for air, Alara," she'd said. "Besides, putting your name on a few charity bids is good for optics before the sale is announced." I hated the word optics. It felt manipulative, but she was right. So I went dressed in a black cocktail dress I'd bought off the rack, feeling like an imposter among the city's old money and established elite. I stood in the back near a surprisingly modern, chaotic painting, trying to look like I belonged. "It's a bit much, isn't it?" a voice said beside me. I turned to see him. He had kind eyes, a slightly crooked smile, and a rumpled charm that stood out in the stiff, formal room. He was looking at the painting, a thoughtful frown on his face. "I think it's honest," I replied, surprising myself. "Life is a bit much most of the time." He laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "I'm Leo," he said, holding out his hand. "Alara," I said, taking it. His hand was warm, his grip firm. We spent the next hour talking, not about the art, but about everything else. He was an architect, passionate about sustainable design and urban green spaces. He spoke about his work with a quiet fire that I recognized, the same fire I felt for my own creations. He didn't ask me what I did, not in that transactional, networking way so common in these circles. He asked me what I was passionate about. He asked me what I was reading. He asked me if I thought the tiny, terrible Canapes were as bad as he did. He knew nothing about me. He didn't know I was on the cusp of a multi-million-dollar deal. He didn't see a walking bank account. He just saw me, and I saw him. A good, kind, intelligent man who seemed completely out of place in a room full of people trying to outbid each other for social currency. When my table number was called for the ridiculously overpriced sculpture I had strategically bid on, he raised an eyebrow. "So you're a fan of abstract metal?" He teased. "I'm a fan of tax deductions," I'd replied with a wry smile. He threw his head back and laughed, and in that moment, something inside me, something I didn't know was tense, relaxed. We had dinner the next night, and the night after that. A week later, the sale of my company was finalized. The news broke in the financial papers. I waited, my stomach in knots, for his reaction. I was terrified the knowledge of my wealth would change things, that it would become a character in our story, a third person in the room. He called me the morning the story ran. "Well," he said, his voice laced with amusement, "that explains how you could afford that terrible sculpture." And that was it. He didn't treat me differently. He wasn't intimidated. He wasn't suddenly more attentive. If anything, he seemed relieved. "Good," he said to me over dinner that night. "Now you can pay for everything." He was joking, of course, but there was a truth in it. The money was mine. It was a fact like my height or my eye color. It didn't define me, and he never let it define me. It was one of the million reasons I fell in love with him. He saw the woman, not the wealth. His family, I would soon learn, was incapable of doing the same. The secret was born out of desperation. His, and by extension mine. It was a little over a year ago. We were at our apartment, a comfortable, modern space that I had bought and he had helped me design. It was late. I was in my office reviewing some investment documents when I heard his voice from the living room. It was low, strained, laced with a panic I had never heard from him before. "Dad, there has to be another way," he was saying. His voice a harsh whisper into the phone. "Can't we ask for an extension? Another loan?" There was a long pause. I stood up, my own heart starting to beat faster. I walked silently to the doorway of my office, just listening. "No," he said, his voice breaking. "No, she can't know. It would destroy her. Her whole life, her whole identity is tied up in that house. We can't lose it." Another pause. "Okay," he finally said, his voice hollow, defeated. "Okay, I'll see what I can do. I love you." He hung up the phone and just stood there, his back to me, his head bowed. I saw his shoulders shaking. My strong, steady Leo, who faced every problem with a calm architectural precision, was crumbling. Leo, I said softly. He flinched, turning around. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a desperate, hunted look. He tried to compose himself to put on a brave face for me, but it was no use. The mask shattered, and he sank onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. I sat beside him, placing my hand on his back. "Talk to me," I whispered, and he did. He told me everything. The story was a slow, painful bleed of bad investments, of pride, of trying to maintain a lifestyle they could no longer afford. My father-in-law, Richard, a man with a good heart but a terrible head for business, had taken out a second, then a third mortgage on the house over the years to cover his losses, all without telling Beatrice. He was always sure he could make it back with the next big thing. He never did. Now the final bill had come due. The bank was foreclosing. They had 30 days. "He's so ashamed," Leo said, his voice muffled by his hands. "He can't bear to tell. My mother, he thinks it will kill her. And Charlotte, God, Charlotte will never forgive him." I listened, my heart aching for him, for the impossible position he was in. He was trying to hold his entire family together, to protect his father's pride and his mother's world. We talked for hours, exploring options. Could I give them a loan? No, Richard's pride would never allow him to accept charity from his daughter-in-law, the one they already viewed with such suspicion. Could Leo take out a loan himself? Not for that amount, not without a massive down payment he didn't have. I watched him, his face etched with worry and a thought, clear and sharp and terrifying, cut through my own anxiety. I had the money. I had more than enough. It was sitting in funds, in stocks, in portfolios designed to make more money. It was an abstract concept, a series of numbers on a screen, but it could be made real. It could be used for something more than just accruing interest. It could buy them peace. It could give Leo back his father's dignity. "I can do it," I said quietly. Leo looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "Do what?" "I can pay it off." I said, "All of it, not as a loan. As a gift. An anonymous gift." He stared at me, uncomprehending. "What are you talking about?" "We can set up a trust," I explained, the plan forming in my mind with the speed of a software algorithm. "A shell corporation. It can purchase the debt from the bank. As far as your parents are concerned, a mysterious benefactor, an investment firm, saw value in the property and settled the mortgage. They'll never have to know it was me." He was shaking his head, a look of horror on his face. "No, Alara, no. I can't ask you to do that. It's too much." "You're not asking," I said, taking his hands in mine. "I'm offering. Leo, look at me. This is what money is for. It's not for buying stupid sculptures or fancy cars. It's for this. It's for protecting the people you love. I love you, and this is tearing you apart. Let me fix it." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and anguish. "But the deception, lying to them for the rest of our lives, what's the alternative?" I asked gently. "The truth would humiliate them. Your father would never recover from the shame of his son's wife bailing him out. Your mother, she would resent me for the rest of her life. This way, their pride is intact. The house is safe. And you are free from this burden. It's the only way." He knew I was right. The logic was inescapable. But there was one condition. "You have to promise me," I said, my voice firm. "You have to swear to me that you will never tell them, no matter what. No matter how they treat me, no matter what they say. This has to be our secret. If they ever found out, it would undo everything. It would become a weapon. And I am not doing this to have something to hold over their heads. I'm doing this so you can sleep at night. He looked at me, his eyes full of a love so profound it took my breath away. He leaned in and kissed me, a kiss full of desperation and gratitude and a shared, terrible secret. I promise, he whispered against my lips. I swear. It was a promise that would be tested, and a promise that, I knew even then, would one day have to be broken. The Beaumonts were members of the Oakhaven Country Club, a place that seemed to be hermetically sealed in the 1950s. It was a world of crisp white tennis outfits, hushed conversations over gin and tonics, and a social hierarchy as rigid and unspoken as the caste system. I hated it. But it was a part of their lives, and therefore a part of mine. We were there for the annual Founders' Day dinner, a stuffy affair held in a ballroom that smelled of lemon polish and mothballs. I was seated between Leo and a woman named Bitsy, a friend of Beatrice's whose face was pulled so tight. She looked perpetually surprised. Beatrice was holding court at the head of the table, recounting a story about her great-grandfather, a man who had apparently single-handedly invented the concept of good taste. Of course, in those days, people understood the importance of breeding, she was saying, her voice carrying across the table. It wasn't just about money, it was about lineage. Knowing where you came from. She cast a quick, meaningful glance in my direction, a tiny, almost imperceptible flick of her eyes, but I saw it. Everyone at the table saw it. It was a dart dipped in poison and aimed directly at me. Leo's hand instinctively found my knee under the table, a silent squeeze of support. I kept my expression neutral, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my water. Reacting was what she wanted. She wanted me to get flustered, to defend myself, to show that her words had found their mark. I would not give her the satisfaction. Bitsy leaned in, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. Beatrice is so proud of her family's history, she said, as if I were a tourist who needed the local customs explained. It must be so wonderful for you, dear, to marry into such a fine family. Quite a step up, a step up. The condescension was so blatant, so breathtakingly rude that I almost laughed. This woman, whose entire identity was tied to her husband's golf handicap, was telling me that marrying into a family on the brink of financial ruin was a step up for me. Me, who had built a company from nothing, who had negotiated with some of the sharpest minds in the tech world, who could buy and sell this entire country club 10 times over and not even notice. Leo is a wonderful man, I said, my voice cool and even. I feel very lucky to be his wife. I shifted the focus back to him, the only part of the Beaumont equation that I truly valued, but Beatrice wasn't done. After the main course, she tapped her glass for a toast. To family, she said, lifting her glass and smiling a brilliant false smile, and to the ties that bind. The ties of blood, of history, of shared values. The things that truly matter, the things that last. Her eyes met mine again across the table, a glint of triumph in them. You are not one of us, they said. You will never be one of us. Later that evening, as we were leaving, a man I vaguely recognized as one of Richard's golf buddies cornered me by the coat check. You're the little lady who snagged Leo, he said, his breath smelling of whiskey. Heard you. We're quite the catch. He winked, a lewd, suggestive gesture that made my skin crawl. The narrative was clear. I was the clever, ambitious girl from the wrong side of the tracks who had successfully trapped the scion of a good family. I was a gold digger. The rumor, born in the insecure heart of my mother-in-law, had taken root and was beginning to spread like a weed. In the car on the way home, Leo was silent, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his. Knuckles were white. I'm sorry, he said finally, his voice tight with a fury he was trying to suppress. That was unbearable. The way they treat you, the things they say. It's okay, I said, though it wasn't. It was 1,000 tiny cuts, and I was starting to bleed. No, it's not okay. He burst out, hitting the steering wheel with the flat of his hand. They're my family, and I love them, but they are being cruel and blind. And I hate that I can't just tell them. Tell them what? I asked softly, though I knew the answer. Tell them the truth? And what would that accomplish, Leo? It would destroy your father. It would enrage your mother. It would turn my gift into a weapon, a source of shame and resentment for the rest of our lives. Is that what you want? He shook his head, slumping back in his seat. No, he said, his voice weary. No, but I hate this. I hate watching them disrespect the woman who saved them. They don't know that, I said, and they can never know. We made a promise. I reached over and took his hand, lacing my fingers through his. You and me, I said. That's the team. As long as we're solid, I can handle the rest. I said the words with a confidence I didn't feel. The truth was, I didn't know how much more I could handle. The weight of the secret and their scorn was getting heavier every day. The next evening, I found myself in a state of quiet fury. The echoes of the country club dinner, the condescending remarks, the whispers, they were all swirling in my head. I needed to ground myself to reconnect with the person I was outside of the suffocating Beaumont bubble. So I retreated to my home office. This room was my sanctuary. It was a space I had designed for myself, a testament to my own hard-won success. One wall was a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf filled not with leather-bound classics, but with books on coding, market analysis, and behavioral economics. Another wall was a massive whiteboard, currently covered in complex diagrams for a new AI-driven logistics platform I was helping to fund. My desk was a sleek, minimalist slab of reclaimed wood, holding nothing but my laptop and a single perfect orchid. This room was where I had built my fortune. It was where I was still building it. It was the one place where I felt completely, unapologetically myself. I sat at my desk and pulled up my portfolio. Numbers scrolled across the screen, a river of green and black. Stocks, bonds, real estate holdings, angel investments, and a dozen different startups. It was a digital empire, built not on heritage or lineage, but on logic, risk, and an almost obsessive work ethic. I thought back to the early days before the sale. The years of living on credit cards, of working 18-hour days, of pitching my ideas to rooms full of skeptical men who looked at me like I was a child playing dress up. I remembered the thrill of securing my first round of funding, the terror of payroll, the dizzying exhaustion of scaling up. I had earned every single dollar. I had fought for it, bled for it. And yet, in the eyes of my husband's family, all of that was invisible. They didn't see the years of struggle. They didn't see the intellect, the grit, the sheer force of will it had taken to get here. They saw a simple dress and a quiet demeanor and concluded that I was nothing, a blank slate they could project their own fears and prejudices onto. They called me a gold digger, assuming I was digging for their depleted, pathetic little mine when I was sitting on a mountain of my own creation. The absurdity of it was so profound, it was almost comical. Leo came into the room, holding 2 glasses of wine. He set one down on my desk, his eyes scanning the complex diagrams on my whiteboard. Building a new world? He asked softly. Just trying to make sense of the old one, I replied, leaning back in my chair. He looked at me, his gaze full of a deep, knowing sympathy. He knew what I was doing in here. I was reminding myself of who I was. You know, he said, leaning against the desk, my mother, for all her talk of heritage, has never worked a day in her life. My father inherited the house and a small portfolio, and he, well, you know what he did with it. Charlotte works part-time at an art gallery, a job my father's connections got for her. They live in a world of inherited things. They don't understand what it means to build something. It scares them. You scare them. I I don't want to scare them, I said, my voice small. I just want them to like me. The words, spoken out loud, sounded so childish, so needy. But it was the truth. I had never had a real family. My own parents were gone, and my childhood had been a transient, lonely affair. I had craved the warmth, the belonging, the noisy, messy chaos of a real family. I had hoped to find it with the Beaumonts. It was a foolish, naive hope. They do like you, Leo said, and then he corrected himself. My father likes you. He's just too terrified of my mother to ever show it. He took a sip of his wine, and my mother. She doesn't dislike you, Alara. She dislikes what you represent. You are a mirror, and she doesn't like the reflection she sees. I looked at the numbers on my screen, the tangible proof of my success. It was my armor, but it was also my burden. I had used it to save them, but in doing so, I had created a secret that prevented them from ever truly seeing me. I was trapped in a paradox of my own making. I had all the power, yet in their world, I had none. And the only way to claim it was to reveal the one thing that would destroy them all. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon. It was Charlotte. Her voice, usually so sharp and dismissive, was laced with an uncharacteristic fluttering excitement. Alara, she said, the name sounding foreign on her tongue. I'm calling to officially invite you to Mom and Dad's 40th wedding anniversary party. How lovely, I said, my voice carefully neutral. When is it? Next month, she chirped. We're hosting it at the house, of course. A big, proper affair, catered. We're expecting at least 100 people. She paused, and I could hear the gears turning, the formulation of her next carefully crafted jab. It's going to be frightfully expensive, of course, but some things are worth it. Celebrating a real, lasting commitment, you know? The implication was clear. My marriage to Leo, in her eyes, was not a real, lasting commitment. It was a transaction. Of course, I said evenly. Leo and I will be there. The weeks leading up to the party were a masterclass in Beatrice's passive aggression. She would call me under the guise of asking for my opinion, only to dismiss it immediately. Alara, dear, do you think we should go? With the salmon or the beef Wellington? She'd ask. When I'd offer a preference, she'd sigh dramatically. Oh, I don't know. The beef is so much more substantial, more traditional. Let's stick with the beef. It was a game she was playing, a way of constantly reminding me that my input was requested but not required, that I was a consultant in a life where she was the CEO. The most blatant moment came a week before the party. Beatrice, Charlotte, and I were at the house, finalizing the seating arrangements. Beatrice was lamenting the cost of the floral arrangements. It's just robbery what they charge for peonies these days, she sighed, fanning herself. With a guest list, but one must have peonies. It's expected. She looked at me, a sly, calculating glint in her eye. It's such a shame Leo's architecture firm hasn't taken off yet. It would be so helpful to have a little extra support right now. It was a test. A blatant, shameless probe to see if I would offer to pay. She was dangling the bait, waiting to see if the little gold digger would bite. If I offered, it would confirm her suspicions that I was trying to buy my way into the family. If I didn't, it would confirm her belief that I was a selfish outsider, hoarding my mysterious resources. There was no way to win. I looked at her, my expression a placid, unreadable mask. I'm sure you'll manage, Beatrice, I said sweetly. You always do. Her smile tightened. I had not taken the bait, round one to me, but I knew the night of the party would be the main event. The evening of the anniversary arrived, cloaked in a heavy, humid stillness. The house was transformed. Twinkling lights were woven through the trees in the garden. Peonies, in fact, were everywhere, their sweet, heady scent mixing with the expensive perfumes of the guests. The Beaumont's friends and family, a veritable army of the old guard elite, filled the rooms, their voices a low, polite murmur. I wore a vintage Dior gown, a simple, elegant column of dark silk. It was understated, but to a discerning eye, its value was unmistakable. It was my own private joke, a silent rebuttal to their narrative. Leo, handsome and solid in his tuxedo, stayed close to my side, his hand a constant, reassuring presence at the small of my back. He was my shield, but a shield can only protect you so much. I could feel the eyes on me, the curious glances, the whispered asides. I was the exhibit, the strange creature from another world that had infiltrated their ranks. I could hear Charlotte's voice from across the room, her laugh a little too loud. I saw Beatrice gliding through the crowd like a queen, accepting accolades, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. The tension was building, a slow, steady crescendo. I felt like an actor in a play, waiting for the inevitable dramatic climax. I knew it was coming. Beatrice had been priming the pump for weeks. Tonight, she was going to make her move. Tonight, she was going to try and put me in my place, once and for all. I took a deep breath, straightened my spine, and prepared myself for the onslaught. I had no idea it would be so much worse than I imagined. The first salvo was fired by Charlotte. It was time for the toast. Leo went first, delivering a beautiful, heartfelt tribute to his parents, his voice thick with a genuine love that momentarily warmed the frigid atmosphere of the room. He spoke of their endurance, their partnership, and the home they had built. The irony was a knife in my gut. Then Charlotte stepped up, her champagne flute held high. She was glowing, her face flushed with wine and a sense of her own importance. To Mom and Dad, she began, beaming. 40 years, an inspiration to us all. She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd before they landed on me. A malicious little smile played on her lips. And to my brother, Leo, she continued, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness, who, after years of searching, finally found a girl who truly appreciates the finer things in life. The joke, if you could call it, that landed with a sickening thud. A few of the guests chuckled uncomfortably. Leo's hand tightened on my arm. But the Beaumont inner circle, the ones who had been indoctrinated into the Alara as a gold digger cult, laughed. It was a validation of their shared prejudice. I felt a cold, hard knot of fury begin to form in the pit of my stomach. I smiled, a tight, brittle thing that didn't reach my eyes. I would not let them see me break. An hour later, as the party was in full swing, Beatrice cornered me near the grand piano. She was holding a fresh glass of champagne, her eyes glittering with a cold fire. She leaned in close, her voice a low, venomous hiss meant only for me. "I want to be very clear about something," she said, her smile a terrifying rictus. "When Richard and I are gone, there will be expectations. I hope you are not harboring any delusions of a windfall. This house, this land, it is all we have. And it will stay in this family. It will go to Leo and Charlotte to be preserved, not to be sold off to fund whatever it is you people do." It was a direct assault, a declaration of war delivered with the quiet, chilling confidence of someone who believes they hold all the cards. She was drawing a line in the sand, protecting her territory from the foreign invader. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it, to stand in a house that I owned and warn me not to get my hands on it, was almost too much to bear. My rage, which had been simmering all night, was now a silent, white-hot inferno. But I held it in. I looked her directly in the eye, my expression unreadable. "Thank you for your candor, Beatrice," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. "It's always good to know where one stands." I turned and walked away, my heart hammering against my ribs. I needed air, I found Leo in the garden, his face a mask of thunder. He had seen the exchange. "What did she say to you?" he demanded, his voice low and furious. I told him, word for word. He closed his eyes, a muscle working in his jaw. "That's it," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "I'm done. I'm telling them, right now. I can't do this anymore. I can't let them do this to you." "No," I said, grabbing his arm. "Leo, no. Think about what you're saying. It will destroy them. It will be the end of your family. They are destroying us." He shot back, his voice raw. "Can't you see that? This secret is a cancer. It's eating us alive. I would rather have the truth, no matter how ugly, than live this lie for one more day." Before I could argue, before I could reason with him, my father-in-law, Richard, appeared at the French doors. "There you are," he said, his face pale with distress. "Beatrice is about to give her toast. She wants everyone inside." He looked from my face to Leo's, sensing the explosive tension between us. "Is everything all right?" Leo looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Let me do this." I shook my head, a silent, desperate no, but it was too late. The final act had already begun. We followed Richard back into the house, into the lion's den for the final public execution. We re-entered the drawing room just as Beatrice was tapping her champagne flute with a silver spoon. The sound, sharp and clear, cut through the low hum of conversation, drawing all eyes to her. She stood near the fireplace, a portrait of regal matriarchy, her back straight, her chin high. She was glowing with a sense of righteous purpose. This was her moment, the culmination of her campaign. She began by thanking everyone for coming, her voice smooth and practiced. She spoke of her 40 years with Richard, of the joys and the hardships, of the importance of tradition and legacy. It was a beautiful speech on the surface, but underneath it was a carefully constructed narrative, a story of Beaumont resilience, of Beaumont superiority, and I knew with a sickening certainty where it was heading. Her eyes scanned the crowd, and then they settled on me. She held my gaze, a cold, triumphant smile on her lips. The room was silent, expectant. Leo stood beside me, rigid, his body humming with a furious, suppressed energy. He was a bomb, waiting to go off. "We have protected this family's name and integrity for generations," Beatrice said, her voice ringing with conviction. "We have weathered storms. We have faced adversity. And we have always, always maintained our dignity." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Then she delivered the killing blow. "And through it all, we have learned one thing. We know how to spot a shameless gold digger when we see one." The words, spoken with such clear, venomous intent, sucked the air out of the room. A collective, shocked gasp went through the crowd. It was no longer a veiled insult, a passive-aggressive jab. It was a public branding. An execution. She had finally said the quiet part out loud, in front of 100 witnesses. In that moment, something inside me broke. It wasn't my heart. It wasn't my spirit. It was the dam of patience, of restraint, of quiet endurance that I had so carefully constructed over the past year. It shattered, and all the rage, all the frustration, all the righteous, burning indignation came rushing out, not in a hot, messy flood, but in a wave of ice-cold, terrifying calm. Leo started to move, to speak, to detonate, but I put a hand on his arm, stopping him. My touch was light, but my message was clear. "This is mine." I picked up my own champagne flute from a nearby table. I took a slow, deliberate step forward. Every eye in the room was on me. Beatrice watched me, her expression one of pure, unadulterated triumph. She thought she had won. She thought I would cry or run or make a scene that would only prove her right. She had no idea what was coming. I stopped in the center of the room, a few feet from her. I held her gaze. "You're right, Beatrice," I said, my voice surprisingly clear and steady. It carried through the silent room, each word perfectly enunciated. "You should protect this house. It is, after all, quite an investment." A flicker of confusion crossed her face. This was not the reaction she had expected. "I'm so glad you could all come tonight to celebrate in this beautiful home," I continued, my gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of the guests. "A home that holds so much history, so much pride." I turned my eyes back to Beatrice and to Richard, who was now looking at me with dawning horror. He knew. He suddenly knew what I was about to do. "In fact," I said, my voice dropping slightly, drawing them in, "the pride associated with this house is so important that on October 14th of last year, when the bank was about to foreclose on it for the final time, an anonymous benefactor stepped in." Beatrice's face went white. Charlotte's jaw dropped. The guests were murmuring a low, shocked hum. "This benefactor," I went on, the words flowing with an unstoppable, surgical precision, "purchased the outstanding mortgage in its entirety, a sum of $1,782,000, all of it paid in full through a private trust." I paused, letting the numbers sink in. I let them absorb the reality of the ruin they had so narrowly, so mysteriously escaped. Then I delivered the final devastating truth. I raised my champagne flute in a mock toast. "So please," I said, my voice as cold and sharp as a diamond, "enjoy the party. I'm so happy I could provide the venue." I smiled, a real smile this time, but it was a terrible, chilling thing. "And if you're interested in the name of the trust for your records, Richard, it's the Alara Vance Family Trust. You see, Beatrice, I don't dig for gold. I own the mine." The silence that followed my announcement was a physical thing. It was a vacuum, sucking the life and the sound out of the room, leaving only a ringing in my ears. For a long, suspended moment, no one moved, no one breathed. The 100 guests were frozen in a tableau of shock, their faces a mixture of disbelief, horror, and a dawning, delicious scandal. Then Beatrice dropped her champagne flute. It shattered on the hardwood floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the dead silence. It was the only sound. She stared at me, her face a ghastly, mottled white. The triumphant queen of a moment ago was gone, replaced by a woman who looked as if she had been struck by lightning. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Richard, her husband, looked like he was having a heart attack. He swayed on his feet, his hand clutching his chest, his face ashen. He stumbled backwards and sank into a nearby armchair, his eyes wide and vacant. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his wife with an expression of such profound, bottomless betrayal, it was almost painful to witness. He had protected her from this truth, allowed himself to be a fool in her eyes, all to preserve her pride. And she had repaid him with this public, venomous cruelty. Charlotte was staring at me, her face a mask of pure, uncomprehending shock. The snide, superior smirk was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed horror. The world as she knew it, a world of Beaumont superiority and her own inherited importance, had just been turned completely upside down. The foundation of her entire identity had been revealed to be a lie, paid for by the woman she so openly despised. Leo stood beside me, not shocked by the truth, but by the fact that I had finally deployed it. He looked at me with a kind of awe, as if seeing a part of me he never knew existed. The quiet, patient Alara was gone. In her place was someone who would not be broken, who would not be silenced. He reached for my hand, his fingers lacing through mine, a silent, solid declaration of allegiance. We were a team, and we had just won the war. The guests, recovering from their initial shock, began to murmur. The whispers grew, a rising tide of scandal. People started to make their excuses to back away from the epicenter of the explosion. No one wanted to be caught in the fallout. They were grabbing their coats, avoiding eye contact with the ruined family, their faces alight with the thrill of a scandal they would be dining out on for weeks. The perfect Beaumont anniversary party had become the social event of the season for all the wrong reasons. Within 10 minutes, the room was empty, save for the family. The caterers were silently, efficiently clearing away the wreckage of the party, their faces impassive masks. The four of us, me and Leo, Richard, and Charlotte, stood amidst the debris of our lives. Beatrice was still frozen in the same spot, staring at the shattered glass on the floor as if it were the ruins of her entire world. Finally, Richard spoke, his voice a hoarse, broken whisper. "Beatrice," he said, not looking at her, "is it true? What she said? About you calling her a—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Beatrice flinched, the spell broken. She looked at her husband, her eyes wild with a desperate, cornered panic. "Richard, she began, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean it was the wine." "Don't," he said, his voice suddenly gaining a strength I had never heard from him. A strength born of absolute, final disillusionment. "Don't you dare lie to me. Not now." He finally looked at her, and his gaze was cold, empty. "I have spent a year," he said, his voice shaking with a quiet, terrible rage, feeling like the luckiest, most blessed man on earth, grateful to God, to the universe, to some anonymous angel for saving us. And it was her. It was this girl, this wonderful, generous girl that you have been tormenting, that you have been trying to drive away from our son. You did this to us." He stood up, his movements stiff, ancient. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a shame so profound I had to look away. "I am so sorry, Alara," he whispered. Then he turned and walked. Out of the room, out of the house, and out of the life he had known. Charlotte, finally finding her voice, rounded on me, her face contorted with a mixture of rage and humiliation. "Are you happy now?" she shrieked. "Are you satisfied? You've destroyed our family. You've ruined everything." "No, Charlotte," Leo said, his voice as cold as ice. "You did. You and your mother. You did this." Alara just held up a mirror. "It's not her fault you didn't like what you saw." He took my hand. "Let's go," he said quietly. We turned and walked out, leaving. Charlotte and Beatrice alone in the wreckage of their beautiful, empty house. As we stepped out into the cool night air, I felt a strange, hollow sense of release. The secret was out. The burden was gone. But I felt no joy. There is no victory in devastation. The car ride home was a silent movie. The streetlights slid across the windshield, illuminating Leo's face, his expression grim and unreadable. The air between us was thick with everything that had just happened, with everything that had been said and done. The silence wasn't angry, it was heavy. It was the silence of aftershock, the ringing in your ears after a massive explosion. We pulled into the garage of our apartment building, the engine's hum dying into the quiet of the concrete space. We still hadn't spoken. We rode the elevator up, walked down the hall, and entered our apartment, our home, our sanctuary. Tonight, it felt different. It felt like a bunker. I walked the floor-to-ceiling windows in the living room and looked out at the glittering expanse of the city. A city I had conquered. A city that felt more like home to me than any house ever had. "You promised," Leo said, his voice quiet behind me. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, a reminder of the vow we had made. I turned to face him. His face was etched with exhaustion, with a deep, profound sadness. "They called me a gold digger in a house I paid for," I said, my voice low and shaking. Your mother stood in front of 100 people and tried to publicly humiliate me, to brand me as something cheap and ugly. What was I supposed to do, Leo? Stand there and take it? Continue to protect the pride of people who have none? I was going to handle it, he said, his voice raw. I was going to tell them. You saw me, I was ready. And what would have happened then? I shot back, my own voice rising. It would have been you defending me. You fighting your own family for my honor. I would have been the damsel in distress, the poor, victimized wife who needed her husband to rescue her. And your mother would have hated me even more for it, for turning her son against her. No, this had to be me. I had to be the one to say it. I had to be the one to claim my own power. I have spent my entire life fighting my own battles, Leo. I wasn't going to let you fight this one for me. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the length of the room. I know, he said, his voice full of a frustrated anguish. I know you're right, but Alara, the look on my father's face, the way he just broke, and my mother. God, my mother. He stopped, his back to me. They're my family, and they're in ruins, and we're the ones who dropped the bomb. They built the bomb, Leo, I said, my voice softening. They handed it to me. All I did was press the button. I walked over to him, wrapping my arms around him from behind, resting my cheek against his back. His body was rigid with tension. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm sorry for the pain this is causing you. I never wanted that. But I am not sorry for telling the truth. We have been living a lie for a year. A lie that was poisoning us, poisoning our marriage. You said it yourself in the garden. It was a cancer. Well, the surgery was brutal. But the cancer is out. He was silent for a long time. I could feel the conflict warring inside him. The love for his family, the loyalty to me, the horror of what had happened, the relief that the secret was finally over. He finally turned in my arms, his hands coming up to cup my face. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. What happens now? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. I don't know, I said honestly. I have no idea. But whatever it is, we face it together. No more secrets, no more lies. Just you and me, the team. He leaned his forehead against mine, closing his eyes. The team, he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. He pulled me into a fierce, desperate hug, and I held on just as tightly. We were two survivors clinging to each other in the wreckage. The world we had known was gone, and a new, uncertain one was just beginning. The week that followed the party was defined by a profound and total silence. It was as if the Beaumont family had ceased to exist. No calls. No texts. No angry emails. Just a void. It was a silence that was louder than any argument, a testament to the depth of the devastation. I imagined them in that house, my house, moving like ghosts through the rooms, unable to look at each other, suffocating in the truth. Leo was a wreck. He tried to call his father, but Richard didn't answer. He tried Charlotte, who picked up, hissed, I have nothing to say to you, and hung up. He didn't even try to call his mother. He was adrift, cut off from the family that, for all its flaws, had been his anchor his entire life. I did my best to comfort him, but I knew that this was a grief he had to navigate on his own. I was the cause of it and the solution. My presence was both his comfort and a constant reminder of the chasm that now separated him from his blood. Then, exactly 1 week after the party, an email arrived. It was from Richard. The subject line was simply, documents. My heart pounded as I opened it. The message was short, stiff, and formal. Alara, for my own records, and for the sake of proper accounting, I would be grateful if you could provide my lawyer with the official bank documents confirming the settlement of the mortgage. He will be in touch. Sincerely, Richard Belmont. There was no apology, no recrimination, no emotion at all. It was the email of a businessman, a practical, pride-saving request. But it was more than that. It was an acknowledgement. It was the first crack in their wall of denial. He was not disputing my claim. He was asking for the receipts. It was his way of accepting the unacceptable, of beginning to process the new reality. I forwarded the email to Leo. "This is a good sign," I said gently. He read it, his expression grim. "A good sign?" He said, a bitter edge to his voice. "He's asking for proof, as if he still doesn't quite believe it. Or maybe he's preparing to sue us." "He's not going to sue." "US," I said. "He's processing. This is the only way he knows how, through facts and figures. It's less painful than dealing with the emotions." I sent the required documents to my lawyer to be passed along to his. The transaction was complete. The truth was now notarized. The silence resumed for another 2 weeks. Leo and I existed in a strange limbo. We were trying to find our new normal, a life that didn't involve Sunday brunches or passive-aggressive holidays. It was quieter, simpler. But there was a sadness to it, an amputation that was still raw. Finally, Leo's phone rang. It was his father. "I have to take this," he said to me, his face pale. He walked out onto the balcony, closing the glass door behind him. I watched him through the window, pacing back and forth, his silhouette stark against the evening sky. The conversation was long. I saw him gesture, run his hand through his hair, listen. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the emotion. It was a painful, difficult, necessary conversation. When he came back inside, his eyes were red-rimmed, but his shoulders seemed lighter. "I'm going to see them," he sighed. "Alone. Is that a good idea?" I asked, my own anxiety flaring up. "I have to," he said. "Dad." He asked me to come. He said it's time to talk. Really talk. He was gone for 3 hours. It was the longest 3 hours of my life. I paced the apartment, imagined a dozen different terrible scenarios. When he finally returned, he looked like he had been through a war. He sank onto the sofa, his body language screaming exhaustion. "How was it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He took a long, slow breath. "The house is like a mausoleum," he said, his voice flat. "They're just broken. Dad has moved into the guest room. He and my mother aren't speaking." He paused, staring at his hands. "My father?" He apologized. He said he's been a coward. He said he's so ashamed of how they treated you, of how you stood by and let it happen because he was too afraid to face the truth about his own failures. Tears sprang to my eyes. An apology from Richard. It was more than I had ever expected. "And your mother?" I asked, dreading the answer. He shook his head, a look of profound sadness on his face. "She's in complete denial. She's trying to frame what you did as a hostile takeover. She said you did it to control us, to humiliate her. She's convinced herself that you are the villain in the story, because the alternative, that she is the villain, is something she can't live with." He looked at me, his eyes full of a weary resignation. "She may never forgive. You, Alara, or me, or my father. She's lost in her own bitterness. The family I had hoped to join was shattered. There would be no reconciliation, no happy ending, just the jagged, broken pieces. And yet, as I looked at my husband, I felt a strange sense of peace. The truth, however ugly, was out, and we had survived it. Together. A week later, I received another email from Richard. This time, the subject was a meeting. He and Beatrice were requesting to see us, both of us. My first instinct was to say no, to refuse to subject myself to another round of their drama. I had told my truth. I had nothing left to say to them, but Leo convinced me otherwise. For Dad, he said. He's trying. This is his attempt to build some kind of bridge. We have to at least show up. We met at a neutral location, a quiet hotel bar downtown. It was awkward, painful. Beatrice looked terrible. She was thin, pale, and her eyes were full of a cold, hard resentment. She refused to look at me, directing all her comments to Leo. Richard, on the other hand, looked clearer. The fog of denial had lifted, leaving behind a man who seemed to be seeing the world, and his wife with a painful new clarity. Beatrice offered a stilted, pathetic excuse for an apology. "I'm sorry if my words were misinterpreted," she said, staring at a point over my shoulder. It was the classic non-apology, a masterpiece of blame shifting. I didn't even bother to respond. But then Richard turned to me. He looked me directly in the eye, his own gaze full of a deep, genuine shame. "Alara," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "there is no excuse for our behavior, for my behavior. You showed us a kindness that we were incapable of understanding, and we repaid you with cruelty. What you did for us, it was a gift, a grace. And I'm sorry, truly sorry. It was real. It was real. It was honest. It was everything I had never expected to hear from a Beaumont." I looked at this broken man, this man who had lost. His pride, his wife's respect, and his own self-worth, and I felt a pang of something that felt like forgiveness. "Thank you, Richard," I said softly. "That means a lot." The meeting ended soon after. There was no grand resolution, no tearful hugs, but a boundary had been drawn. A new, fragile understanding had been reached. In the car on the way home, Leo and I decided on the new rules of engagement. We would see his father. We would be there for him. But his mother, until she could offer a real, genuine apology, would be kept at a distance. We would not subject ourselves to her bitterness. We were building a new life, and that life would have walls, healthy, necessary walls. 6 months later, Leo and I were standing on the balcony of our new apartment. We had sold my old place and bought this one together. It was ours. A home built not on secrets and lies, but on a foundation of brutal, hard-won honesty. The city sprawled out before us, a glittering tapestry of light and possibility. Our life was different now. It was quieter. We saw Richard for dinner once a week. He and Beatrice were still living together in that big, empty house. But they were strangers, cohabiting in a state of armed truce. He was trying to rebuild his life, to find a new identity outside of being Mr. Beaumont. He had started volunteering at a local community garden. He seemed happier, lighter. We hadn't seen Beatrice or Charlotte since that awful day in the hotel bar. I didn't know if we ever would, and I was okay with that. The warmth I had once craved from them, the sense of belonging, I have found it elsewhere. I have found it in my work. I have found it in my friendships. Most of all, I have found it here with Leo. He came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. We stood there for a long time, just watching the city breathe. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly. Telling them? I thought about it for a moment. I thought about the pain, the destruction, the family that had been torn apart. I thought about the woman I had been, the one who had silently endured so much, hoping to be loved. And I thought about the woman I was now, stronger, freer, unapologetically myself. "No," I said, my voice firm. "I regret that it was necessary. But I don't regret telling the truth." I turned in his arms to face him, my hands coming up to cup his face. "I didn't get the family I thought I wanted," I said. "But I got the one I needed, just you and me." He smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his kind eyes. "The team," he said. "The team," I agreed. He leaned in and kissed me, a slow, sweet kiss full of a quiet, resilient love. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something better. It was real. I had stopped trying to fit into their story, and I had finally completely started writing my own.